There is a list. Every military academy in the Concord keeps one. It is not published. It is not discussed at diplomatic functions or mentioned in recruitment materials. It exists in classified databases under a category that translates, roughly, into the common tongue as facilities for which liability has been waived in advance. The Kethvaren Combat Institute sits at the top of that list. Has for 62 years. The survival rate for the first full training cycle, all 12 months, is 34%. Not because the faculty is cruel. Because the faculty is accurate. They select for the galaxy's most dangerous soldiers. They push those soldiers past every threshold biology, psychology, and physics has identified as the limit of a living organism. They do this because the Concord's most unwinnable wars are not fought by diplomats or fleets. They are fought by individuals. Small, quiet, singular. And the Institute produces them like a foundry produces blades, by burning everything soft away. Every species in the Concord has submitted candidates. Most wash out. Some do not come back. No one had ever submitted a human. Not because they were excluded. Not because of bias or treaty or formal objection. Because no one, in the entire administrative history of the Concord, had ever looked at humanity, that 7 billion strong, barely spacefaring, biologically improbable species from a mid-tier system nobody important had mapped yet, and thought, yes, that. It was a clerical error. One transposed digit in a species code. One intake officer on the night shift who did not look up from her screen. One confirmation sent automatically, as confirmations are, because the system assumed a sentient being would not submit a candidate to Kethvaren by accident. The system was wrong. And, by the time anyone noticed, the human was already on the transport. The transport docked at 6:09. I know because I was standing at the end of the intake corridor with a datapad in one hand and a container of something the cafeteria called warm concentrate, which was neither warm nor concentrated and had the color of a regret. And I watched the manifest scroll past on my screen with the focused attention of someone who absolutely did not want to be there at 6 in the morning watching a manifest scroll. 43 candidates. The largest intake in 3 years. I had the bunk assignments, the orientation packets, the dietary restriction flags for the 2 Veth-class trainees who could not process atmospheric nitrogen without pharmaceutical assistance. I had the security clearances and the contraband declarations and the pre-enrollment psych summaries, all of which were, as a rule, terrifying to read, because the Institute selected for individuals whose psych summaries made security staff want to go home and rethink their career trajectories. I had all of it. What I did not have, what no one had apparently, because the error had cleared every automated flag in the system and sailed through intake processing like a stone through still water, was a briefing on species designation Delta 7-9-1. I had never heard of Delta 7-9-1. I found out later that the common name for Delta 7-9-1 is human. I found that out at 6:14 when the last candidate walked off the transport, and I looked up from my datapad, and I said, and I want the record to reflect that I said this in a completely professional tone with no audible distress whatsoever. What is that? It was not what I expected. I don't know what I expected. Something large, probably, given the Institute's selection criteria. Something with an immediate physical presence. The GEN candidates had arrived looking like architectural features, all height and density, and the quiet authority of things that have survived geological events. The 2 Veth candidates moved like the concept of threat had learned to walk. Even the Paleth, who were not physically impressive by Concord standards, had this quality of coiled readiness that made you aware of every exit in the room. The human was not large. She was, I confirmed later, medium height by most galactic averages. Lean, bipedal, upright, with the kind of build that looked functional rather than intimidating. Too forward-facing, no? I will not write that. Everyone writes that. I refuse. She had brown skin, dark hair pulled back, and a duffel bag over one shoulder that was held together in 2 places with what appeared to be a different kind of tape than the rest of it. Like it had been repaired. Several times. By someone who had access to many types of tape, and no preference for consistency. She stepped off the transport, and stopped. Looked down the length of the intake corridor. Took in the architecture. The Institute does not design for comfort. It designs for the specific psychological effect of making you feel permanently watched. And the security installations, and the 42 other candidates, and me, standing at the end with my datapad, and my tepid concentrate, staring at her. She looked at all of it. Then, she looked at the manifest board above the corridor entrance, where the Institute's name was displayed in 6 Concord languages. Then, she looked back at me. This Kethvaren, she said. Her Concord common was accented. Not badly. Passable, functional, but accented in the specific way of someone who learned it from recordings rather than immersion. The vowels were slightly off. The stress patterns were human-shaped. Yes, I said. Cool, she said, and walked past me into the corridor. I filed a query to Central Administration at 6:17. The response arrived at 6:44, which is when I was supposed to be delivering the orientation briefing to 43 candidates in the main assembly hall, and which is also the worst possible time to receive a message that reads, in full, error confirmed. Species code transposition. Candidate enrolled under incorrect classification. Candidate has been formally notified and offered transport back to point of origin. Candidate has declined. Institute liability waiver applies. So, you're handling it. Admin Vandris CH. Vandris CH is the senior administrator for intake operations. I have worked for her for 4 years. I have covered her shifts, filed her incident reports, trained 3 intake officers she subsequently promoted ahead of me, and attended her nephew's naming ceremony. She sent me 11 words and a liability waiver. I stood in the hallway for a moment that was longer than a moment, holding my datapad, and then I walked into the assembly hall to deliver the orientation briefing to 43 candidates, one of whom was a species that had never been inside this building before and had, when offered a way out, said no. The orientation briefing for Kethvaren is not designed to welcome you. It is designed to let you know, in precise and dispassionate language, exactly how bad the next 12 months are going to be. The casualty statistics are presented without softening. The washout procedures are explained in detail. The section on medical interventions available to candidates is notably shorter than the section on medical interventions that fall outside institute liability coverage. The faculty gives this briefing personally. Senior instructor Varek Sol, who has run intake orientation for 11 years and has the specific manner of someone who finds enthusiasm professionally suspicious, stood at the front of the hall and delivered it the same way he always delivers it. Evenly, without particular inflection, watching the candidates the way a geologist watches erosion, waiting to see which ones crack first. Some always do. Not dramatically, just a settling. A stillness that was not there before. The moment when abstract knowledge becomes belief. I watched from the side of the room, because I had nothing else to do while my professional situation collapsed around me. Most of the candidates listened the way experienced soldiers listen, evaluating, filing, cross-referencing against things they already knew. The Gin barely moved. The Veth watched Varek Sol the way you watch something that might be a threat, just to stay calibrated. The human sat in the 3rd row, slightly off-center, with her duffel bag on the floor between her feet. She was taking notes. Not on a standard datapad. On paper. Actual physical paper, in a small bound book, with what appeared to be a mechanical writing implement. I had not seen anyone take physical notes since the archival records training session I attended 2 years ago as a requirement I deeply resented. She was writing fast. Not frantic, focused. Like she was transcribing something she intended to study later. Varek Sol reached the section on the gauntlet, the 6th month evaluation, the one with the 40% washout rate in a single week, and paused, because he always pauses there. Let the number sit in the air. The human wrote something in her book, tilted her head slightly, and wrote something else underneath it. I could not read it from where I was standing. After the briefing, candidates were assigned to their bunk clusters and given 2 hours before the first physical assessment. Standard procedure. The 2 hours are not rest, they're observation. The faculty monitors interaction patterns during unstructured time because social behavior under low-stress conditions is a baseline they use to evaluate high-stress deviations later. I know this because I read the faculty methodology documents the year I started this job, when I was still interested in understanding the place I worked. I found the human in the equipment corridor at the 40-minute mark, which is where candidates are not supposed to be during the unstructured period. She was crouched next to a wall panel that had been partially removed, not broken, removed, with the fasteners set carefully to one side. And she was looking at the infrastructure inside with the expression of someone reading a map. "You're not supposed to be here," I said. She looked up, not startled, just registering. "Corridor's not restricted," she said. The panel is. She looked at the panel. Back at me. I didn't break it. You disassembled it. I put the screws right there. She gestured at the neat row of fasteners on the floor beside her. I can put it back. I should have escalated this. Written it up. That is what the protocol says. Unauthorized contact with Institute infrastructure. Notify security. File a report. Let the chain handle it. Instead I said, what are you looking at? She looked back at the panel. Ventilation routing. Pressure differentials. She tilted her head at the ductwork inside. This whole section vents to the northeast exterior. Wind patterns off that face would be. She checked something in her small book. Significant. During the morning assessment window. I stared at her. The gauntlet, she said. The outdoor evaluation stage. Northeast face. The briefing mentioned a cliff section. She tapped the open panel with one finger, not touching the wiring, just indicating. Wind would matter. The gauntlet orientation. The first briefing. She'd been taking notes. She was mapping the institute. On day 1. Before she had even been to her bunk. You have 2 hours, I said. The assessment starts at 10. I know. She started replacing the panel fasteners. Her hands quick and practiced. I work fast. Log entry, 9:58. 47 minutes since I found the human disassembling institute infrastructure. Verexol has not yet been informed. I am aware that not informing Verexol is itself an infraction. I am choosing not to examine that too closely right now. The first physical assessment at Kethvaren is a removal exercise. The name is literal. You are placed alone in a section of the Institute's lower training environment, a mapped space, roughly 2 kilometers by 3, designed to mimic the varied terrain of a mid-intensity combat theater, with no equipment, no briefing on the objective, and a single instruction, get out. The exits exist. There are 7 of them. They are not marked. The environment is not empty. It contains 6 automated threat systems, 3 active faculty observers who interact with candidates at their discretion, and a time limit that is not disclosed in advance. Most candidates find one exit in 40 to 90 minutes. The record is 14 minutes. Set 11 years ago by a Gen candidate who later became one of the most decorated soldiers in Concord history. I watched the assessments from the monitoring station because Vandra CH had sent me a follow-up message clarifying that yes, I was responsible for the human candidate's administrative track, which meant I was supposed to document her performance. I will tell you what I expected. I expected a human who was brave, possibly, in the directionless way of someone who did not fully understand what they had walked into. I expected effort. I expected a washout that was not cruel, just inevitable, the kind that happens when the gap between will and capability is too wide to bridge by wanting. I expected to write a report about a species code error and a candidate who tried. She found an exit in 22 minutes. Not by luck. Not by panic running until she hit a wall that turned out to be a door. She moved through that environment the way water moves through terrain, not fighting the shape of it, reading it. She found the threat system coverage patterns inside the first 4 minutes, which I know because she stopped moving and did nothing for 90 seconds, which is the kind of pause that looks like fear and is actually calculation. Then, she moved along the seam between 2 coverage zones like she'd been given a map. She was not given a map. She found the ventilation routing that connected to the northeast exterior. Used the pressure differential, the one she'd identified that morning from the disassembled wall panel, to orient herself inside the environment. She walked out exit 4 at the 22-minute mark, which is the 3rd fastest assessment completion in Institute history. Then, she sat down on the floor of the exit corridor and wrote something in her small book. I file my documentation. I wrote it in the most neutral language I am capable of producing. I described what she did. I described the timeline. I attached the monitoring logs. I did not write what I thought about it. What I thought about it was this. She had been here for less than 4 hours. She had, in that time, reviewed the briefing notes she took during orientation, identified a piece of Institute infrastructure she could use for reconnaissance, physically opened that infrastructure, extracted the information she needed, and then used it to complete the first assessment in the 3rd fastest time on record. She did not have any of the advantages that make this place survivable. No experience with the Institute. No intelligence on the environment. No network. No allies. No context. She just looked at everything very carefully and figured out what it was for. I sat in the monitoring station for a while after I filed the documentation. Outside, through the viewport that faces the northeast exterior, I could see the cliff face she'd identified from the ductwork. The wind off it was significant. The morning assessment window was almost closed. She had been right about all of it. By day 3, the other candidates knew something was different about the human. Not in the way I knew it. Not analytically, not from monitoring data. They knew it the way you know something is wrong with a room before you identify the specific thing that is wrong. A pressure change. An atmospheric shift. Her name, I'd confirmed from the enrollment record, was Sergeant Marin Voss. The rank was from her home species military designation, what humans call a non-commissioned officer rank, which the Concord equivalent would put somewhere between third-tier operative and senior field asset. Not high. Not intra-level. She did not introduce herself to the other candidates. She did not avoid them either. She just moved through the shared spaces without performing sociality, which is its own kind of statement. The Gin noticed first, the way large careful things notice smaller careful things. Their trainee, a candidate named Hrexel 7, started tracking her during the communal morning drills. Not with hostility, with the specific attention of someone recalibrating their threat model. By day 5, 2 of the mid-tier candidates had started following her schedule. She noticed, said nothing, adjusted her timing by 20 minutes. The second major assessment came on day 7. The Institute calls it the convergence. The candidate documentation describes it as a multi-party coordination exercise under contested conditions, which is the administrative language for, we put you in an environment with the other candidates, create 3 simultaneous crises, give you no shared communication infrastructure, and see what you build. It is designed to find out who leads, and who follows, and who does neither, which is often the most important category. I watched from the monitoring station with instructor Hrexel, who had started inviting himself to my observation shifts somewhere around day 4. He did not explain why. I did not ask. We developed a professional silence that I found, honestly, easier than most conversations I have at this institute. The Gin candidate organized immediately. This is what Gin do. They build hierarchies the way other species build fires, by instinct, because without one they feel the cold. Within 6 minutes, Hrexel 7 had established a functional command structure with 4 candidates in defined support roles. The human was not in it. She was not opposed to it. She acknowledged the structure, which meant she wasn't going to undermine it. And then, she moved to the perimeter of the operating area and started doing something else entirely. What is she doing? Hrexel said. It was not a question, technically. It was the noise he makes when something surprises him, which happens rarely enough that I have learned to register it. Mapping the crisis points, I said. There were 3 simultaneous crises running in the convergence environment. Standard configuration, a structural failure, a hostile contact scenario, and a resource denial event. The design assumes that candidates will triage and allocate. Some go here, some go there. The coordination is the test. She was not triaging between them. She was looking at them together, from the outside, like she was trying to find the geometry of all 3 at once. Hrexel said nothing. He watched. At the 14-minute mark, she moved. Not toward the structural failure, where 8 candidates were working. Not toward the hostile contact scenario, where the Gin-led group had committed their heaviest resource. She went to the resource denial event. Alone. The one no one had prioritized because it was the least visually urgent. A slow-acting infrastructure compromise that wouldn't become critical for another 20 minutes. Or so the standard assessment timeline predicted. She reached it in 4 minutes. Assessed it in 30 seconds. Then, she did something I had never seen in 11 years of convergence documentation. She made it worse. Not catastrophically, precisely. She accelerated the resource denial timeline in a specific way, using components already present in the environment, so that it would reach critical threshold in 7 minutes instead of 20. Then, she walked back to the Gin-led group and told them. Not asked. Told. In the flat, factual register of someone transmitting information with no investment in how it's received. The Gin looked at her. Looked at the direction she'd come from. Looked at the data on his assessment band. He moved his entire command structure in under 90 seconds. The structural failure and the hostile contact scenario had to be handled with reduced personnel. Both resolved, barely, at the edge of acceptable parameters. But the resource denial event, now critical, now urgent, now impossible to ignore, got solved by 12 candidates working in the same direction instead of 8 working in 3. Total resolution time, 19 minutes. Previous convergence record, 26 minutes. I wrote it all down. I filed the documentation with my hands doing the stress tremor thing, and Verexol standing next to me not saying anything, which was its own kind of communication. Log entry, Day 7, 2204. I went back through the monitoring logs from the convergence. Watched the moment she made the resource denial crisis worse. Watched it 4 times. Each time I watched it, I tried to find the version of that decision that made less sense, and I could not find it. She knew what the candidates would prioritize. She knew what they would ignore. She changed the timeline on the ignored thing until it couldn't be ignored. And then, she handed the problem to a group that was already organized to solve it. She didn't solve it herself. She made it solvable. I don't have the right word for what that is. On Day 9, a Paleth candidate named Tessic tried to take her notes. I want to be clear about the context. This is not unusual at the Institute. The culture selects for competitive behavior, and competitive behavior at Kethvaren includes intelligence gathering, resource denial, and social pressure. It is not sanctioned. It is not punished. It is considered part of the environment. Tessic was 3rd in the current candidate rankings. Fast, technically excellent, strategic in the way that comes from formal training. The kind of strategist who wins within defined systems and struggles when the system itself is the problem. She had been watching the human for 4 days. I had seen her watching. I had not flagged it because watching is not an infraction. The notes were the obvious target. Everyone had seen the book by then. The small paper one, the mechanical implement. Candidates talked about it the way people talk about things they don't understand but find significant. The consensus seemed to be that it was some kind of memory aid or cultural habit or eccentricity. Tessic waited until a free period when Marin Voss was at the physical training equipment and the bunk cluster was supposed to be empty. Tessic was fast and careful and had correctly identified that the book was kept in the outer pocket of the repaired duffel bag. Tessic had not considered that the human did not keep the book in the duffel bag during physical training periods. She kept it in her left boot. I know this because the monitoring record shows Tessic searching the duffel bag with increasing speed for approximately 4 minutes. And then, the door opening, and Marin Voss walking in, still damp from the training circuit, pulling the book from her boot, and setting it on the shelf like she was simply putting it away, and looking at Tessic with an expression I have watched 3 times now, and still cannot fully categorize. Not angry. Not cold. Something older than either of those things. You want to look at it, she said. You can look at it. She picked it up. Held it out. Tessic stared at her. Go ahead, Marin Voss said. I know what you think's in here. Tessic took it. Opened it. Flipped through pages that, on the monitor, I could see were not what Tessic expected. Not tactical notes. Not mapped weaknesses in the other candidates. Numbers. Lists. Timestamps, and measurements and spatial calculations in a notation system I did not recognize. No names. No profiles. No information that would give competitive advantage in any direct sense. Just the raw physical data of every environment she'd been in since day 1. Tessic handed it back. That's it. Tessic said. That's it, Marin Voss said, and put the book back in her boot. I spent 20 minutes that evening trying to decode what the notation system was. I have a background in administrative data processing, which means I am not wholly incompetent with numerical analysis. But the system she was using did not match any standard Concord format or any human format in the cultural database the Institute keeps for enrolled alien species. I asked the database whether humans had a standard field measurement notation for tactical environments. The database said, multiple systems in use, varies by military branch, and regional tradition, no universal standard. She had built her own. The 3rd formal assessment came on Day 9, late afternoon. It is called the bridge. The bridge is not a metaphor. It is a literal bridge, a suspended structure crossing a 70-meter drop in the Institute's northern evaluation terrain. The bridge can be traversed. It cannot be traversed easily. The faculty introduces variables during the crossing: load, environmental interference, time pressure, a second party moving in the opposite direction. It tests nerve. It tests physical competency. It tests the interaction between those two things under conditions designed to erode both. What it does not test, what it has never needed to test in 11 years of assessments, is structural load calculation under combined stress factors, because no candidate has ever tried to do that. Marin Voss, at the 42nd second of her crossing, stopped. Stopped completely. In the middle of the bridge, with wind off the northern face moving the whole structure, with a faculty observer coming in the opposite direction to introduce the time pressure variable, with a load distribution on her body positioning that was technically within parameters, but visibly uncomfortable. She stopped and looked at the connection point between the primary suspension cable and the anchor housing. The faculty observer stopped too. This is not standard procedure. The standard procedure is to continue toward the candidate, maintaining the time pressure variable. Verexol, in the monitoring station next to me, said absolutely nothing. She was looking at the anchor housing for 11 seconds. I counted. 11 seconds on a swaying bridge in wind, not moving, which is its own act of nerve, the act of holding still when every instinct is pushing you to move. Then, she looked at the faculty observer. And, she said, in Concord Common that was still accented and still slightly wrong in its vowels, this anchor was last stress-tested when. The faculty observer, who is a former combat veteran with 4 commendations, and who I have personally watched make candidates cry through sheer professional neutrality, said nothing for 2 full seconds. Then, he said, maintenance records are not available to candidates. I know, she said. I'm asking you. Another second. 6 months, he said. She nodded. Looked at the anchor housing one more time. Kept crossing. Log entry, day 9, 1915. I pulled the maintenance records after the assessment. The primary suspension anchor on the North Bridge was stress-tested 6 months ago. The secondary anchor, the one that takes load transfer in high wind conditions, was last tested 14 months ago. It is within safety parameters. Technically, if the wind holds to standard levels. I filed a maintenance review request. I filed it as routine, not urgent, because I did not want to explain what prompted it. I told myself I was being thorough. I am not entirely sure that is the right word for what I am being. That evening I found her in the common area with the physical paper book, and I did something I will document here, because I believe in complete records, even when complete records make me look like someone who does not have their professional priorities correctly ordered. I sat down across from her. She looked up. The anchor was fine, I said. I checked. I know, she said. You couldn't have known that. On the bridge. She looked at me for a moment. The kind of look that is actually a calculation wearing the face of a look. No, she said. But I knew it was possible for it not to be. She went back to her notes. I sat there for another minute. The common area had the background noise of 40-some candidates in various states of exhaustion and recovery, the low-register rumble of the GIN candidates, the quick, clipped exchanges of the VEF, someone on the far end of the room losing an argument with a nutrition dispenser. They sent you a message, I said, when the error was confirmed. They told you there'd been a mistake. You could have left. She didn't look up. I know, she said. Why didn't you? She was quiet for long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, she said, without any particular emphasis, like it was an obvious thing that hadn't required much deliberation, because they said I could. I did not fully understand this. I thought about it for the rest of the evening. I thought about it after lights out, in the monitoring station, watching the overnight log scroll. I thought about it in the specific way you think about things that feel important, but won't hold still when you try to look at them directly. Because they said I could. Not because I wanted to prove something. Not because I had something to prove. Not ambition, not pride, not the specific combative hunger that Kethvarin is designed to attract and exploit. Because the possibility of leaving had been offered as if it were the obvious choice. And she had found that funny. Log entry, day 9, 2357. Verexol sent a message at 2200 hours requesting a full candidate status review meeting tomorrow morning. The subject line read, Delta 7-9-1, adjusted assessments. He has never, in 4 years, requested a meeting about adjusting assessments for an individual candidate. I have been awake since. The concentrate is cold. I am drinking it anyway. I have stopped noticing that it is bad. I think that is what this place does eventually. It recalibrates your baseline until the things that were supposed to be unacceptable start feeling like the ordinary weather. I wonder if that's what already happened to her. I wonder if it happened before she got here. I do not write this in the official record. I am writing it here. There is probably a meaningful difference between those two things. I am too tired to find it right now. She was 4th in the candidate rankings at the end of day 9. Not first. Not on paper. Not by the metrics the Institute uses, raw assessment scores, physical performance data, faculty evaluation marks. Those metrics favored the GIN candidate and one of the VEF, who were 1st and 2nd respectively. 3rd was Tasik, the Palith, who had seen the notes, and understood something from them that I was still working out. Maren Voss was fourth, but she was the only candidate whose ranking had moved upward every single day without exception. Steady, incremental, unhurried. Like she was not trying to win by the end of day 9. Like she was trying to win by the end of day 365. And the Academy, which had eaten candidates who arrived here certain of themselves, who had come and ranked first in their homeworld's military assessment systems, who had trained for this specifically, was starting, slowly, in the particular way of an institution that has never needed to reconsider itself, to reconsider. Verexol's meeting request sat in my inbox. Outside the monitoring station, the northeast wind was doing what she had said it would do on day 1. I pulled up the convergence logs again, watched her make the crisis worse on purpose for the 4th time, then the 5th. The thing about it, the thing I kept coming back to, was that she had not made it worse out of chaos or desperation or the specific recklessness that some candidates use to mask fear. She'd made it worse because she understood, in under 14 minutes, that an improvable situation was more dangerous than a bad one. That something urgent was more tractable than something latent. She had turned a slow problem into a fast one because fast problems get solved. I don't know if she learned that somewhere. I don't know if it's a human thing or a Maren Voss thing or the kind of thing you develop when you've had to solve problems in conditions where waiting was not a survivable option. I know that in 9 days, a clerical error had walked into the galaxy's most effective sorting mechanism for the dangerous and the exceptional, and the sorting mechanism was quietly revising its parameters. I filed my end-of-day documentation at 014. I noted the ranking, the trend line, the adjusted assessments meeting. I did not write my conclusion. Conclusions in official records have a way of becoming permanent, and I am not yet sure of mine. What I am sure of is this. Vandra CH sent me 11 words and a liability waiver. The liability waiver is going to need updating.